Welcome to the Cyber Risk Management Podcast. Our mission is to help executives become better cyber risk managers. We are your hosts. I'm Kip Boyle, CEO of Cyber Risk Opportunities.
And I'm Jake Bernstein, Cybersecurity Counsel at the law firm of Newman DuWors.
And this is the show where we help you become a better cyber risk manager.
The show is sponsored by Cyber Risk Opportunities and Newman DuWors LLP. If you have questions about your cybersecurity related legal responsibilities,
and if you want to manage your cyber risks just as thoughtfully as you manage risks in other areas of your business, such as sales, accounts receivable, and order fulfillment, then you should become a member of our Cyber Risk Managed program, which you can do for a fraction of the cost of hiring a single cybersecurity expert. You can find out more by visiting us at cyberriskopportunities.com and newmanlaw.com.
So, Kip, what are we talking about today?
Jake, today we're going to talk about how germs can teach us a lot about how to deal with cyber attacks.
Okay, that's a stretch. I'm looking forward to how we dig ourselves out of this particular topic hole. So let's get going.
Well, it shouldn't be too hard. We did do show prep, so everybody in the audience, there you go. Jake is my accomplice here. But okay, so it's 1847, and we're in the childbirth clinic at the General Hospital of Vienna.
And there are no computers?
No.
Anywhere.
No. I don't know what technology they have at that point, but I don't know that, given all the technology that I have now, that I would really want to live in that time. I don't think they have penicillin yet, or it's not widespread, but
no, penicillin is like World War II era, so
yeah,
quite a ways, almost 100 years actually.
All right, so we're in Vienna, and the mortality rates for mothers as a result of what then was called childbed fever are shockingly high. About 18% of all the women who go to the hospital to give birth die. And nobody knows why. It's this mysterious malady called childbed fever. And Dr. Semmelweis, who works at the hospital, doesn't understand what's going on. And he's curious. And so the questions that he's asking himself are things like, why is it that the childbirth clinic that the medical students work in, why does it have a mortality rate over 5 times higher than the clinic that the trainee midwives work at, and in the same hospital building?
Well, and I bet too that, I mean, childbirth, mortality rates in mothers were not 18% for home births during the same time period.
They probably were not
anywhere close, and so that, I'm not sure that they worried about that, but that is that's a shockingly high statistic. So what was going on? How did he deal with this?
Yeah. So Dr. Semmelweis is looking around and he's trying to figure out what's going on, and he came up with this theory. He theorized that there were these cadaverous particles on the hands of the doctors, but not the midwives. And a cadaverous particle, right, is what you might think. I mean, these are like pieces of dead people, to be very clear. And he theorized that it was these particles that were causing childbed fever. And so why did he think this? Well, it really wasn't that big of a stretch for him to figure this out, because most doctors, as he knew and observed, were routinely performing post-mortem examinations. And then when they were needed in the childbirth clinic, they would just walk over because it wasn't that far away. But critically, they would not wash their hands. So they would do some kind of a dissection or post-mortem exam, and then they would be notified, and then they'd rush over to their childbirth clinic, and they would deliver a baby. Now, interestingly, the midwives, because they were not doctors in training, they were not involved in the post-mortem examination. So Semmelweis is thinking, okay, doctors are doing one thing, midwives are doing another. how can I put some scientific method on this?
So what did he, I mean, this definitely, 1847 is clearly, headed toward the industrial age, the more modern world.
Right.
But anyone who, knows the history of medicine and biology is probably thinking, all of that is still relatively new.
It is. Yeah.
We're like we said, we're decades from the discovery of antibiotics.
Yep. And other things too.
And other things.
Yeah, other things that we absolutely take for granted today. So Dr. Semmelweis said, okay, I'm just going to try an experiment. I'm going to ask all the doctors and all the midwives to wash their hands immediately prior to assisting with childbirth. Any guesses what the impact was of that?
Well, I'm going to guess that was a pretty substantial impact.
Yeah.
Probably enormously so.
Yeah. So, of course, and our listeners probably, this is not that hard to conceive, but the impact was enormous. The mortality rate dropped from 18% to 2%.
So that's almost, that's the next best thing to an order of magnitude.
Yeah. And all because they're washing their hands, not because of some phenomenal, medical miracle, a new drug or whatever. Simple, hygiene, just wash your hands, please. I mean, they weren't even wearing gloves, just so you know. This was all done with bare hands.
Yep.
So
the technology to make gloves is, I think there's a lot of things we take for granted right now, and I think we'll get back to why that is so useful to think about when it comes to we're obviously going towards cyber hygiene in this discussion.
Right. Yeah.
But
so Dr. Semmelweis makes this massive breakthrough. Hey, if we just wash our hands, less mothers will die. I was like, wow, this is this is so wonderful, right? I mean, who could object to this? But strangely enough, this whole idea of hand washing was not taken up very quickly by the medical establishment. And in fact, it took 42 years from the time that Dr. Semmelweis sort of figured this out before surgeons, and not even all surgeons, but just the smallest clusters of surgeons routinely wore gloves while they were performing surgery. 42 years after Dr. Semmelweis established this very clear link between dirty hands and dead people.
Yep. Well, you think about the it's something that another thing we take for granted right now would be that would make, that the result like that would be worldwide news within a day.
Yeah. So modern media, right? Modern communications.
There's just, there really wasn't even an infrastructure for scientific publishing at that point. So
no, there wasn't. But it was more than that. I mean, based on my study of this situation, it wasn't just a lack of communications, although that is a factor. But it's just really attributable, I think, mostly to the fact that people just don't like change, right?
And I'm sure people didn't. I'm sure people thought they weren't going to give him. I'm sure some didn't want to give him credit. There's all kinds of reasons why that would be. Yeah.
Or they just didn't understand. They weren't sure that was it. They were skeptical, and it would require them to change their daily habits, right? I would have to start washing my hands now, and that's a real irritant, right? That's a real bother to me. It slows me down. I get home later at night. There's probably all kinds of things that people were thinking because they just did not understand just how true and just how impactful this was. And just to give you another perspective on this, the first national hand washing guidelines in the United States, what year do you think they were published? Knowing that Dr. Semmelweis figured this out in 1847. What year do you suppose that the U.S. finally embraced this? And
I would probably guess after World War II in the 50s or 60s.
Well, it was after World War II, 1981.
So that's surprising.
It is.
That's
134 years
yeah,
after
that is
Dr.
surprising.
Semmelweis. Now, news travels slow, but that's really slow.
Yep.
So, and so why do I tell this story? Well, because I think, based on my experience working in the cybersecurity profession now for many years, I think that this experience with germs can teach us a lot about how we can deal with cyber attacks. And really what I'm trying to focus on here is a couple of very key ideas, which I want to explore now. But are you starting to see the connection?
Oh, very much so.
Yeah. So, biological germs, I've never seen a germ with my naked eye, and I've only seen, photographs and artists' representations of what germs look like. And yet I am a drop dead believer in the idea that germs make people sick. I don't need to perform a scientific experiment in order to buy into that, right? So, and it turns out that I've experienced, something similar, that, I really think about digital germs as, something that, these are things that float around on USB thumb drives and work through our networks and make our computers sick. And they're invisible too. You don't know that you're going to get hit by one of these things until it hits you. You
Yep.
don't know that when you grab the doorknob, that a bunch of germs just jumped on your fingers. You sort of have to have, you've got a wait and see attitude on whether
Yep.
you're going to get, whether these cooties are going to make you sick, or maybe you've put some cooties on that doorknob and somebody else is going to pick them up and they're going to get sick. But I think,
Well,
the digital equivalent here is like, there was a huge botnet called Mirai a couple of years ago that was the result of home routers and other Internet of Things devices having a vulnerability, and they all got recruited into this enormous botnet, and then that was weaponized, and it ended up taking down CNN, New York Times, and a bunch of other very high-profile websites and huge swaths of the internet. But the people's routers who were hijacked, really, they didn't know. I mean, they didn't know. There was nothing about having their home router attack somebody else that sent up a flag that said, "Hey, something's wrong with my router," and so immediately I think of Typhoid Mary.
yeah, carrier.
Yeah, like, I'm not sick. Why are all
Well,
these other people getting sick around me? And and speaking of Typhoid Mary, I was curious because I've heard that term a lot, but I never really dug into it. But apparently, she was so difficult to deal with that the health authorities actually quarantined her for 29 years.
wow.
She was effectively in prison because she wouldn't voluntarily stop performing work as a cook. And so she was getting people sick all the time. For whatever reason, she was immune to it, but she just would not do the right thing.
Yeah. So this discussion is really interesting to me because if you recall, before I went to law school, I had a lot of experience in molecular biology. I have a degree in that from UW, and I worked in a lab for a long time. And it's no accident that that we named computer viruses after
Viruses.
biological viruses.
Yeah.
And if you don't, the way that a biological virus works is that there's a debate over whether or not they're even really alive or if they're just kind of self-replicating particles, but they invade your cells and then they co-opt the cellular machinery to reproduce themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about a computer virus, particularly a worm that spreads, what is it doing other than invading your central, the central processing unit and forcing it to do calculations that create new copies of it and spreading itself. So
Right.
it is the metaphor is extremely accurate. And if you think about the way that antivirus software works and the way that your immune system works, it's another really, really close metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
In order to be immune to something, you have to get you have to be exposed to it. And there's two
Mm-hmm.
ways you can become immune to something. You can either get it, suffer through it, and then you won't tend to get it again, or you can get a weakened version of it, which we call an immunization,
Right.
that your body will learn. Well, that's pretty much, I mean, it is on a molecular level, it is literally a signature-based system, which is
Right.
exactly how antivirus software works.
Yeah, traditionally that is how it how it's worked. Absolutely.
Yep.
And I want to give you another example. You mentioned the like a network, a worm, right? A digital worm going through a network. Well, if you think about like getting a cold because you touched, a door handle that somebody else touched, and then you rub your eye, or somehow that germ jumped into your body, and that's sort of person to person transmission. But I also think that digital germs can also be like a biological weapon,
Oh,
right?
totally.
So,
It's spread like disease.
right, yeah, yeah, a virulent, particle that floats in the air, right? That's aerosolized or is deliberately released into the atmosphere, because it has been weaponized and delivered, in a bomb. And we saw this very recently in 2017 with NotPetya. It was released in the Ukraine, and it was so virulent and so good at going from computer to computer that it caused, White House estimates, about $10 billion in damage worldwide. And there were some very high profile companies that got seriously hurt by this thing. Merck, uh, FedEx, TNT, Maersk, the shipping giant. I mean, it was out of control. And there you go, right? So whether it's person to person transmission or more like a biological weapon, I mean, I think that this metaphor is apt. So we both agree on that. And so here's how I think, though, it can inform us on cyber risks, or dealing with cyber attacks. And here's one parallel that I think is hurting us. So, Dr. Semmelweis worked in a hospital. He was trained. He was a highly specialized medical professional, and he had to use his access to a hospital and so forth, and his training to figure out, there's a link here. If people wash their hands, disease does not spread as easily, and we don't have to put up with the consequences of that. And today, because we've learned so well, everybody washes their hands without medical supervision, and people wash their hands simply because their parents say it's a good idea, and they don't demand evidence. So this change has been extremely efficient at spreading and being taken up by regular people, and to the point where like we wear gloves, right? When we make food for other people, we cover our mouth when we cough or when we sneeze. We use, we do all kinds of other things too. Like we get an annual flu shot. We see the dentist twice a year, right?
Caveat, in
All
the
this
United
stuff.
States.
Yeah. Of course, in the United States. I mean, I'm an unabashed American, for all the good and all the bad that implies.
Yeah. Well, and I would say all the kind of modern Western countries.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely, right. But this whole idea of being healthy and voluntarily submitting to procedures that, quite frankly, are not very comfortable, right? Going to the dentist is not a very comfortable thing,
Yep.
but I willingly do it because I know that it's going to help me.
It's a lot of minor to somewhat significant inconveniences that we willingly undergo on a regular basis, because it has become part of the gestalt of society, and it's
It works.
health. Like the study of public health is we could learn. We should be looking toward public health when we're looking toward cyber risk management.
Yeah.
And I think that the metaphor is clearly there. It's clearly apt. And so I think what we should talk about now is, how does this inform our ability to deal with cyber attacks and cyber
Yeah.
risk?
Yep.
And, you know, is, from my perspective, particularly as a non-technologist, by trade at least, it's amazing to me how these cyber risks approach invisibly and strike without warning,
Mm-hmm.
much like germs do.
Right.
So
Right.
if we go back to your Dr. Semmelweis, we've got at this point 180, 190-year-old anti-germ theory and some playbooks. How do we, if I want to tell my clients to wash their digital hands,
Mm-hmm.
which we call, if anyone's heard our podcast, well knows, practicing good cyber hygiene.
Right.
What should we do? What's the equivalent? What's the digital equivalent of
Yeah.
washing our hands and seeing the dentist and getting a checkup and getting immunized?
Right. And not relying on specialists to deal with this, right? Because I think that's our history, is saying, oh, well, the IT people will take care of this for me and I don't need to do it. And I think that's one of the corners that we need to turn as a society, right? Is we need to take these ideas of good cyber hygiene, like, hey, I shouldn't use my computer's administrator account for daily tasks like reading email and browsing the internet. That's actually like, operating, or doing a postmortem exam and then going over to the childbirth clinic without washing your hands or wearing gloves. I mean, you're engaging in incredibly risky behavior, and you're probably thinking, oh, the IT people will keep me safe. No, I mean,
Right.
increasingly that is not true. And so we have to take it on ourselves to figure out, what are these hand washing techniques, like not using my administrator account, or using a password manager to generate unique passwords for every site that I visit, and to keep them all in a safe place, and even to ask it to automate my daily work. I mean, productivity can go up and security can go up at the same time by using a high quality password manager. So and we have to, as individuals, we have to say, you know what, that's the right thing to do. I'm going to inconvenience myself a little
Yeah.
bit as I learn how to do this, right?
Yeah.
Quickly.
As you and I well know, it actually turns out to be a benefit once you
It's a,
do it.
it's
But
a big benefit.
making that switch is hard. And I'm going to interrupt your list of practices here, because something else that we've talked about in the past is how people, everyone is a foot soldier in the cyber
Mm-hmm.
world, right?
Yep.
And that's it's a good that's a good metaphor, good concept, but there's a problem with it,
Mm.
right? And the problem with it is that for all foot soldiers, soldiers are commanded by
Mm-hmm.
specialists, by leaders, right?
Right. Generals.
Generals. And so, we might be waiting around. Okay, I'm a foot soldier, whatever. I'm going to wait around for my generals to tell me what to do.
Yep.
Whereas the helpful thing about the cyber hygiene and, digital biological warfare concept is that, biological warfare is targeted at civilians. It's not a military weapon. It's targeted at civilians. And it doesn't matter if you're in the army or not, it's indiscriminate.
Right. Right. And
And
I think that's really the issue, is even if I fire it at military members, it can,
oh
cause
yeah,
a lot of collateral
it'll
damage.
it'll it'll spread. It'll spread,
Yeah.
right? And so how do you protect yourself against that? Well, you can't wait for the general to tell you to wash your hands,
Right. Right.
right?
Right.
So though for certain certain teaching elements of cyber hygiene and cybersecurity, the we're all foot soldiers meme is a good one. But I think this one in this podcast is even more valuable, because it really shows that, look, you know, this starts and ends with the individual. Like,
Right.
we're not, no one's going to tell you to wash your hands every time you come out of the restroom or touch
Right.
a doorknob. Like, you just need to know to do that.
Right, right. So you have to be trained. Somebody needs to tell you that this is the
Yeah.
right thing to do, right? Parents, and in the modern world, we need executive management, right, to teach the workforce. Like,
Yep.
this is expected. This is just like breathing air. This is something that you need to do, and I'm going to provide you, with the tools you need, and I'm going to train you to use them. But it's really up to you to use them, right? So a soldier gets indoctrinated, gets trained, is issued equipment, learns how to take care and use that equipment. And when the shots start getting fired, it's up to each individual soldier to actually point their rifle and shoot, because the general's not there to do it.
You were talking about that, and I thought to myself, gosh, it'd be unreasonable not to. And then a light bulb went off, and I realized that another theme that we always talk about is reasonable versus unreasonable cybersecurity programs, and what it means to be reasonable. And as you were talking, I was thinking, nobody would ever say that it's reasonable for a country to not train its army and just say, go out, do your army thing. It's like, that's crazy, right? That's crazy. No one does that. And I think it would be pretty bad. It would not be effective parenting to never teach your kids to wash their hands. I mean, it's, I'm not trying to make any judgments here, but the idea is that it's reasonable to do so. And even though figuring out what reasonable cyber hygiene and cybersecurity programs are, and that's a hard thing to do, talking about it in this way makes it seem a lot more obvious, right? Like,
well, I hope so. I mean, that's kind of the point of the episode today, is to help create in the minds of our listeners, right, this link between, oh yeah, I do wash my hands every day, and oh, I do go to the dentist, right, and I do these things to stay healthy in the real world against biological germs. Maybe I should start doing the same thing in my digital life. And you know what? It's not all that different from something I already do anyway. And I think that's a really important thing that people need to grasp, because as I said, they are probably thinking that the IT group is doing this for me, and perhaps that was true in the past, but it's like, now we all need to do this, and the impetus for this is just enormous. I mean, the attacks are getting more ferocious and more effective. Phishing is an incredibly effective attack, because it's attacking our human emotions, not our technology, right? And so that makes it extremely personal. And when we work with executive management, right, this is what we're telling them, is like, you've got to equip your workforce to survive in this really virulent, digital environment. And so that's why we're recommending, that you treat cyber risk as a public health problem, and that we borrow heavily from that playbook. By the way, a playbook that's worked really well for us in the last couple hundred years.
It has, and I was looking at our list of cyber hygiene practices and drawing parallels between what the equivalent public health practice is, and avoiding. So you said avoid using our administrative account for routine work. That's basically an affirmative act, and what you said works very well. That is not going from patient to patient without washing your hands or changing your gloves.
Right.
Using a high quality password manager daily is like remembering to put on a clean pair of gloves every time.
Right.
Simply installing security updates, getting your shots, getting your immunizations, checking your credit report at least twice a year for signs of ID theft is, remembering to go to the dentist, go to the dentist, exactly, and then conducting an annual cyber risk assessment. I mean, we literally have something that everyone has to get called an annual physical exam.
Whether you feel sick or not.
Whether you feel sick or not. And in fact, generally you go when you don't feel sick.
Yep. Right? Yeah, because there can be lurking conditions like an undiagnosed diabetes or something like that.
And the whole point of an annual physical exam is to check you out, to see how you're doing over the last year, and to make sure there's nothing that's going to happen bad in the next year.
Let's keep you healthy.
Let's keep you healthy. And that is exactly what an annual cyber risk assessment is for. And, there's still a huge, I think, unfortunate attitude right now where, oh, well, we'll just get a cyber risk assessment done when someone else tells us we need to do it. Like, well, okay. I'm glad you did it. Right. That's like, I'm glad you went to the doctor, but if that's going to be effective, then you need to go every year.
Yeah, exactly. It needs to be a practice, right? A regular practice.
Yeah, exactly.
Practicing good hygiene, good cyber hygiene. Well, if you enjoyed our podcast episode today, you might want to pick up a copy of my new book called Fire Doesn't Innovate, when it is published in January 2019. But here's the thing. If you're willing to post an honest review on Amazon when it does get published, then I would love to share with you an advanced copy of the book. So if you would like an advanced copy, then just let us know. Send an email to info, I-N-F-O, info@cyberriskopportunities.com. And if you put "Fire Doesn't Innovate" in the subject line, then we'll communicate with you back, and we'll get you an advanced copy of the book. And we'd love to hear your feedback on it, and we'd love for you to take a look at it. And that wraps up this episode of the Cyber Risk Management Podcast. Today we talked about how germs in the real world can teach us a lot about how to deal with cyber attacks. Thanks for being here. See you next time.
See you next time.
Thanks everybody for joining us today on the Cyber Risk Management Podcast.
Remember that cyber risk management is a team sport and needs to incorporate management, your legal department, HR, and IT for full effectiveness.
And management's goal should be to create an environment where practicing good cyber hygiene is supported and encouraged by every employee. So if you want to manage your cyber risks and ensure that your company enjoys the benefits of good cyber hygiene, then please contact us and consider becoming a member of our Cyber Risk Managed program.
You can find out more by visiting us at cyberriskopportunities.com and newmanlaw.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.